am Eve Harrow. You are on a One Israel Fund webinar, January 10th, 2022. I'm the Director of Community Development and Tourism. Remember tourism, that thing that people used to go visit other countries and come to Israel? Yeah, well, hopefully that'll start up as soon as this last wave is over and the world is a crazy place. But in the meantime, the community development, I have to say, is going beautifully. Lots of parks, mikvaot, synagogues, sports fields, things that we've been able to build here in Israel with the help of a lot of you over the past year. Can't wait for you all to come and see it for yourselves. One Israel Fund, as you know, for over a quarter of a century, been the premier organization helping to enhance and secure the lives of the Jews living in Judea and Samaria and those who used to live in Gaza. So as what we've been doing in this past year, since I can't fill buses with people and take them all around, you all around, of course, we've been doing virtual videos, and you can see all of those on our website, and this series of webinars where I've been really honored to host some of the leading thinkers and movers and shakers here in Israel. You might have noticed that everybody I interview is in Israel. It's a very important point for me. And I'm really delighted to have on tonight an old friend, and even with that, someone I respect tremendously, Rabbi Dr. Jeffrey Wolf, who has, in addition to being an associate professor at Bar Ilan University, where he teaches also Christianity and Islam and a whole bunch of things that hopefully he'll have time to share with us tonight. The reason he's on tonight is because I felt it was very important to do a webinar on the whole issue of conversion. It is it's legislation that's coming up in the Israeli Knesset. There's a lot of misunderstandings about it, and it is a tremendously important topic. And Rabbi Wolf is a judge for Halakhic conversion, and I couldn't think of anybody better to illuminate for us some of the issues, some of the challenges, not necessarily having answers, but at least making clear for a lot of us what the issues are. So Rabbi Wolf, thank you so much for joining me here. It's evening here in Israel.
Thank you for having me, Eve. It's a pleasure, always a pleasure.
Fun webinar. All right, so I know this sounds like a simple question, and I mentioned that you're also very familiar with Christianity and Islam. What is the big deal with converting to Judaism? As far as I know, in these other two religions and in a lot of other religions, you take on a set of beliefs, you maybe say a sentence or a statement, and you're in. And in Judaism, it's like this whole years and years long process that for many people ends in not actually becoming Jewish. So can you please explain to us what conversion is in Judaism and has it always been like this? Or what we're dealing with now, which needs some kind of legislation, is something that's unusual, and we're dealing with something different in the modern times.
Wow, that's a tall order, even though the entire discussion is predicated on a single paragraph in the Talmud. There's a lot to unpack. There are a few pieces that we have to put together here, and let me just at least describe my points of departure. Based on my own personal convictions and on matters of principle, the truth of the matter is that as far as Israel is concerned, the only mode of conversion which I'm going to discuss is Orthodox conversion. Even though at the moment conservative and reform conversion, I'll talk about that also, has been recognized by the courts, at least for purposes of citizenship. But let me get back to the basics first and try to describe how it works. First of all, to join a group, you have to define the group. Islam and Christianity are religions. Because they're religions, basically what needs to happen is that a person goes through whatever initiation that religion requires, and you're part of that faith. Now, it is a good idea to study that faith before you join it. But by and large, in Christianity, in its various forms, you would get baptized. In Islam, males have to be circumcised, and you make a declaration in front of a Shari court, that's Muslim law, and you become a Muslim, and you're expected to live according to Muslim law. As with everything else, the great philosopher and historian of ideas, Sir Isaiah Berlin from I think it was Cambridge or Oxford, I don't remember anymore now, used to say that Jews are like everybody, Oxbridge. Jews are like everybody else, only more so. So the more so in this case is that Judaism, to the best of my knowledge, is the only religious phenomenon which is both national and ethnic on the one hand, and is a religion on the other. In other words, it is the faith of a specific community which defines the community, but which and which is defined by the terms of the covenant that is contained in the Bible between God and Israel. That's the reason why Jews generally are not missionaries. For the simple reason that the Torah does not require that everyone in the world become Jewish. There are the 7 Noahide laws, which are the basic rules of humanity and morality, which were also, according to Jewish tradition, revealed at Sinai. And those are sufficient for non-Jews to be saved or to have a place in the world to come. Pretty much it's unanimously accepted that it's 90-95% that Christianity and Islam fit those criteria. So since they're already taken care of, there's no reason to make someone or push someone to become Jewish. So that's number one. Number two, in order to join the Jewish people, therefore, it's a dual commitment. You're joining a people and you are joining a religion, but the two are totally interspersed and inseparably so, even though in the past other people have tried to separate them. Formally, what's required is that a person, if you're a male, you have to be circumcised. If males and females have to go to immerse themselves in a ritualarium in a kosher mikvah, which is from which the idea of baptism, by the way, came. Right. Certainly full body baptism, not the way that sort of became extenuated later in the other churches, some of the churches. And and the third part, and this is the part which is sticky, means that you also have to accept the burden or the yoke of the commandments, Kabbalat ol mitzvot. Now, Kabbalah, which basically means if you're joining the Jewish polity, you have to agree to abide by the rules. Which up until the 18th century was never really an issue, because the only real kind of Judaism that there was what we would call today Orthodox or traditional Judaism, where you went to live with the Jewish community and you joined from the outside, but you became a member of the community and you observed all the commandments, and there was nothing more to say about it. In fact,
so like you kept kosher, you kept Shabbat,
you didn't work on the holidays, on Pesach, right? And also if you were in business and you wanted to adjudicate some kind of a claim, you went to a Beit Din, you went to a rabbinic court, you lived your life as part of the Jewish community. Judaism is an all inclusive system, as opposed to Christianity, by the way, and similar to Islam. Judaism, in its traditional iteration, includes every single part of human life. It's not just ritual. It's also personal comportment. It's also hygiene. It's also business. It's also marriage. It's all kinds of things. So that was never a problem. In fact, one of the ironies is that because it was so obvious that people would join the Jewish community and just do what everybody else did, which meant keeping the commandments, it really never says anywhere in the Jewish code, in the codes of Jewish law, that you have to do that, for the simple reason that it was given. And there is a rule in judicial literature that which goes without saying usually does. Right? So that was the situation up until, say, the 18th century. There wasn't a huge amount of conversion of non-Jews to Judaism during that time, for the simple reason that almost all Jews lived under either Islam or Christianity, and it was a capital crime for a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian to convert to Judaism, because that, from their perspective, meant abandoning the truth. So, in fact, if you look at some old versions of the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, you'll see that all the rules of conversion are there, but there's like a little asterisk. At the bottom it says, but we don't do this because the government says it's illegal. Okay. Come the 18th century, things changed. Once the 18th century came, especially in Europe, what happened in Muslim countries is a different story. Jews were emancipated. They no longer had to live on their own. The separate Jewish communities were dissolved. And all of a sudden, the possibility arose that you could actually be a Jew and not live in a Jewish community. You could be a Jew and be what we call a secular Jew and not observe the commandments. Now, that does not make you a non-Jew. In fact, there is nothing no power on earth to un-Jew a person. A person who is born Jewish or converts correct, properly, can never be their status as being Jewish can never be undone. What happened? The problem is that a lot of these people, when they started leaving the Jewish community, they still felt a very strong tie to their families, to the Jewish people. They just started defining themselves as national Jews or as lapsed Jews, whatever the case might be. But they married people that weren't Jewish. Now, this became especially tricky when men married non-Jewish women, for the simple reason that Jewish status is determined, and this has been this case, documentedly the case for at least 2,500 years. I think it goes further, but that's another story. Excuse me.
So you're talking about like the beginning of the Second Temple period, around then,
right?
Because,
exactly. I mean, that's where you have documentation.
Biblically, you look at the tribes, and most of the brothers, for example, are married, local women. I mean, not Jewish women, but that was way, way back. And so for 2,500 years,
I'll tell you something else, though. I'm not even convinced. I mean, in the ancient period, if you went from one tribe to another, you went from one nation to another, one thing you did is that you adapted to whatever say you're a woman, you can't be an Ammonite because you can't marry them. You're from, I don't know, some Arab tribe in Syria, right. in the time of the David's kingdom. And you go and you marry a guy who lives in northern Israel and whatever. So it's very
take on his God along with his
no, exactly. But when you accept his God, that means you have to get rid of your gods. You will end up doing whatever they do, right? So I'm not. So I wouldn't.
It's a whole different world.
It's a different world. But the idea that that there was no transition from the outside world into the Jewish world, I'm not convinced. In any case, it's certainly documented. We have from the Second Temple period.
And we have the famous line in the book of Ruth, your nation is my nation, your God is my God. Correct. And that ends the whole
Notice, however, the nation comes before religion there.
Yes.
You join the group and then you have to keep the mitzvah.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is, so the rule was if you're the child of a Jewish mother or you were converted, then you were Jewish and that's it. There's no way to undo that. But if it's a Jewish guy who's in Germany or is in France and he marries a non-Jewish woman, then his children are not Jewish. And the Jewish, until relatively recently, the Jewish taboo against intermarriage was incredibly profound for self-preservation, because of basic tribal and national loyalty, whatever the case might be. And therefore, it was only then that the question came up, okay, can we convert this woman, even though she's not going to, it doesn't have to be women, men also, but most of the cases were women, even though she's not going to be observant because the husband's not observant, she's not keeping the laws. So is there such a thing as a conversion where there is less than 100% compliance with or acceptance of the law? And here,
he wants to join the people, but not necessarily the religious.
This is, or even accepting and saying, yes, I agree that being Jewish means keeping the law, but I'm going to be a bad Jew. If you want to put it that way.
Right.
So this started a whole discussion with a very broad range of opinions that were of course, two Jews.
That's one thing that never changes, right?
The practice is to disagree. And so you have a fairly broad, a very broad range of opinions on this specific issue. It's what would you require beyond the formal act of, say, circumcision or immersion and a formal declaration in front of a rabbinical court? What is required? So here,
what are the red lines? What are the red lines? Not even keeping Shabbat, whatever. Okay.
Right. What are the minimum? There are some argue, some are minimalists, and others say no. If you get up and you say you're going to keep the commandments and you recognize them, if they're binding, but you have no intention to do so, that's fraud and that the entire action is invalid. Those are the two. You got all kinds of variations in the. And
just to throw into the mix, you don't have to answer it now, but maybe keep it in mind for later, is the frustration of converts who say, I've got to do like all this stuff. And then there's somebody who was born of a Jewish mother and he considers himself fully Jewish. And, you know, he was eating bacon and eggs for breakfast and flying on Shabbat. And how is that fair?
Okay, so I don't know about fair. However, on the other hand, it makes it there is precedent. I don't know how well this is going to go down, but the usual comparison that is made is to naturalization. A person can be born in the United States and not know anything. I mean, you can be one. My kids showed me this. I could not believe it. They asked a college graduate in someplace in some major city in the United States. They asked him who fought at the Battle of Gettysburg, and the answer of this college graduate was the Getty people. So you know, you could be born in the United States and be a total ignoramus when it comes to American history, and you're an American citizen, you're with all the rights thereof. Whereas if you come and you immigrate legally and you're naturalized, I mean, you have to learn American history and civics, and you have to be able to I mean, I don't know if this is still true, but you have to be able to recite the preamble of the Declaration of Independence and the preamble of the Constitution. You have to know the difference between the three sections of government, and all kinds of other stuff, because when you're joining something, the requirements are usually higher than those that are required of someone who is always born there. Is it fair? I don't know if fair is the issue. Certainly, there is definitely an element of truth in marketing involved, because before you have a person join, it's not just a question of testing whether they're worthy. They should know what they're getting themselves into. I mean, that is only fair. And in addition, if you are joining the Jewish people, which we see as a privilege, then it's also a question of, you know, it shouldn't be easy. It should be something which is, people are born in. That's true. Okay, that's the way life works, and you know, anybody who actually has changed status or changed class or changed a social group knows that that's exactly what you have to go through. And if anything, the Torah is something which is really pragmatic and takes a look at how people act, and tries to work with the raw material that it has.
So you say that it shouldn't be easy, but there's a far cry between not being easy and the situation that we find ourselves in now, where we hear story after story about people who really wanted to convert and wanted to keep all the mitzvot. They weren't just going through it in order to marry someone. They really wanted to become Jewish, and it took them years, or they were never able to do it, or there was one roadblock after the other. So how did we get from there to there?
It depends on where. I'm going to concentrate on Israel because the United States is a whole other North America.
No, because the topic of this conversation is the conversion law that's going through the Knesset now.
Number one, the conversion was always on the agenda here, but it was never a major issue because it was never a very large non-Jewish population that was a candidate for conversion until the mass, and there were a few blips on the screen, but until the mass immigration, the mass aliyah of the Jews who left Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which itself was a bit of a miracle. I've students who didn't know that there was a Soviet Union, but that's because I'm old, or they're young or something. But it really wasn't as much on the agenda. Number one. Number two, the rabbinate in the following Ottoman law, Israel. Okay, let's do it this way. Israel, to a significant degree, is improvised. It's been improvised from day one. One of the things that we did in 1948 was just continue everything. You know what? I'll tell you. After everybody sat down and signed the Declaration of Independence on Friday afternoon, May 14th, 1948, Ben-Gurion got up and he said, everything stays the way it stays with all the laws of the mandate and laws of the Turks who lived before here, except for two things. First of all, anybody who wants to come to Israel can come. The British White Paper of 1939, which banned Jewish immigration to Israel, is annulled. And I forgot there was something else, and that's it. And that was the point of departure. So as a result of this status quo, everything stays the same. Many laws in Israel are still laws from the British Mandate.
Yeah.
Many forms that we fill out are still from the British Mandate. And the laws and the real estate laws go back to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans were thrown out of Palestine, or thrown out of southern Syria in 1917, and yet a lot of the rules are still Ottoman. One of the things we inherited from the Ottomans was that every single under the Ottomans under Islam in general, there was no secular anything. So all religious groups were subject to the authority of the heads of their religious communities. So all the different Christian churches under the patriarch or this patriarch, there were the whole story.
There were many. Yeah.
The Islamic authorities are the address for Muslims, and the rabbinate for Jews. Now, the only form of Judaism that was here in all the years was Orthodox Judaism of a significantly conservative bent, small c. Probably that is, I think that's to a large degree as a result of the fact that the people who, the men who formed the rabbinate did not go through the crucible of America, and did not have a more modern Orthodox, if you want to call it yeshiva university kind of outlook. They were what you would call more Haredi or more traditionalist oriented, even though they were Zionist, tended to be somewhat more on the conservative side, small c. That situation has got but nevertheless, the first few generations of chief rabbis and those that manned the rabbinate up until the early 90s tended to give a little bit more give and a little bit more aware of the outside world and a little bit less conservative. In the 1990s, Yitzhak Rabin, when he was elected to be the prime minister in 1992, effectively handed over the entire rabbinic establishment to the ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party Shas, and by extension to the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate in Bnei Brak and elsewhere, as sort of this idea that we'll give them this and they will give us the Oslo Accords and they will support us for the peace plan and so on and so forth. So now the ultra-Orthodox community was founded as a reaction against modernity. So they have a built-in philosophy of law, which is very much it's I like the word reactionary. There's a very, very strict. There's always concern that something's going to go. It's something that things will be undermined, that religion will be undermined by modernity. Considering what the kinds of things that have been going on in the last 20 years in the West, a lot of their concerns have proven to be certainly in place.
Yeah.
And this has led to a situation in which the rabbinate has become even more restrictive when it comes to conversion than in fact it was even previously, when it was fairly strict anyways. That is let now when you have a small population of individuals who want to convert, then you can play with it. When you're talking about you're talking about hundreds of a million Russians made Aliyah, of which a third of them were technically not Jewish, because they were the children of they were children of Jewish men and Russian women. And
let me just interject and explain that the law of return is kind of the back end of what the Nazis had done, meaning you were considered a Jew by the Nazis if you just had one Jewish grandparent. And so you could make Aliyah, you could move to Israel if you had just one Jewish grandparent. But if it was on the father's side, so for Aliyah reasons, for moving to Israel reasons, you can come, but you're halachically not Jewish. And here is the issue that has really brought us to where we are today. And right around that same 1990s, 1991, it all comes together.
So what ends up happening as a result is that you have these people who are who were released from Russia, and they don't know anything about Judaism because they were persecuted as Jews in Russia. And they come here and they become Israeli, and they become part of society. And then they want to get married to a person who is actually formerly Jewish, and they can't because there's no civil marriage in Israel. But that's only the beginning, because there's a broader issue, and I have to get back to your question about what about people that want to convert. There's a broader issue, and I think this is the piece which is really, really critical. I started this discussion by mentioning the fact that Judaism is a combination of national identity and religion, which are intertwined, inextricably. Sorry. One of the most important elements that maintains the state of Israel is the solidity and the strength of its tribal identity. I don't want to put it any other way. In other words, yes, we fight all the time over all kinds of issues, but at the end of the day,
it makes us a family.
Everybody can ostensibly marry everybody else. And because everybody ostensibly is Jewish, you can then, within the context of everyone accepting your own status as a full member of the group, you want to become more religious, you want to be less religious, you can swing back and forth. The spectrum can exist. Can exist. So you have maximum room for self-expression and self-identification, but at the end of the day, there's a song that was popular in the 60s was concerning Kulanu Yehudim. Everybody's Jewish. If we get to the part of the challenge and part of the existential challenge, which is posed by this increasingly large population of people who are Israelis and consider themselves Jews and are considered by others to be Jews, who aren't technically Jewish, is that you will get increasing population where part of the population, actually more than half, will not marry or cannot marry the other people. And that is a very, very dangerous situation, not just for the continuity of the Jewish people, but for the physical safety and morale of the state of Israel, because we're still faced by existential threats from all over the place. It's also a matter of personal tragedy in a lot of cases, because people don't know, and and there are those who would like to convert their children, whatever the case might be, and the problem there. Unless the idea is to make conversion, which has with integrity, available to as many people who want it as possible for their own sakes, and also for that of their children. Because you know what, even for the sake of the solidarity of the Jewish the Jewish solidarity of the state of Israel. Now, as it happens, over the course of the past 25 years, the country has become Israel, which had gone through a period of time in which it was less and less and less and less Jewish. Over the last 25 years, has become increasingly and more profoundly traditional. Not Orthodox yet, but that's the direction that it seems to be going, but certainly profoundly traditional. It's you see it everywhere from popular culture, where a black kippah wearing singer will have his song, named Misha Rivo, will have his song sung on the really uber secular army radio. And that's
music, I think, is where it's really standing out.
In music and
a lot of rock music set to Psalms. Yeah, correct. Amazing. Yeah.
And you also find, but it comes up in a lot of places. There are more informal Jewish study groups going on in the state of Israel today, not under Orthodox auspices, than at any other time in its history. So on the one hand, you have that happening. On the other hand, you have this population, which effectively, because of the very sort of very suspicious or cautious, cautious attitude of the religious authorities, even if they want to become, convert, they can't, because the kinds of standards that are set, which I think are really beyond what is required, even according to the more conservative interpretations, can't happen. And I understand why rabbis would be cautious, because, as I said, there's this idea that if you're less than sincere in your acceptance of the commandments, then that's a fraud. So fraud never works. On the other hand, is there room for individual judgment on the part of the courts? And this is where we get to the present law. Throughout the ages, simply for reasons of necessity, every rabbinic court was autonomous. You assume that the rabbi that you hired for your city, or whoever lived in your city, served at the head of your court, who had the proper education, he had the proper degree of piety and fear of heaven and integrity, and whatever the court decided, and they would judge based on what they saw and how they knew. It is in all cases. I'm not just talking about conversion. So the pattern always was, this is throughout both the Muslim world and the Christian world, that that the local rabbi was the authority. If there was some kind of a strange situation or some egregious error, so you could appeal to a major authority outside the town. But usually, things were done locally, and that was considered proper.
And there was mutual respect, though, between, like, someone got converted in Antwerp and to Berlin.
There was a tradition of collegiality. Now, again, I don't know who's of our, 120 people. Of the 120 people watching, I don't know.
We're closing it now. Yeah.
My shelves here, especially this shelf here, is full of examples of cases where they appeal to other rabbis out of town and so on, but those are the exceptions that only confirm the rule. This is the first time that there's been a centralized rabbinate since ancient times. And as with all centralized anything, bureaucracy gets in the way, and politics gets in the way, and jobs get in the way. And the more centralized the authority, the more out of touch you are with the situation on the ground. Now, in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, conversion was made available by the local city rabbi, who would appoint, he had a court, and they would do conversion, and that was it. And in fact, some of the really major religious Zionist rabbinic figures in the rabbinate endorsed precisely this
mode of operation. Right. Okay.
In the 90s, all of that was taken away from the local rabbis, and it was put in the hands of a centralized authority, which tries to do its best. I'm not throwing stones. But depending on who you have, and you have these are professionals who don't follow, and don't meet the candidates. They see them only when they appear before them. There are some wonderful people, and then you have some bureaucrats. I mean, there's all kinds of individuals, and there's been created a very, very serious logjam in terms of people, even the people who want to convert. So in order to try to break the logjam, inter alia, it's been this. He's not the first one. This has been suggested a few times. The former. Justice ministers,
way back, right?
Two justice ministers in a row, actually, not in a row, but two major justice ministers actually suggested this. Yaakov Naaman, and on the one hand, and Moshe Nissim on the other, whose father himself was chief rabbi, suggested that, among other things, that it's only responsible to put things back in the hands of the local rabbis who know the people, and this will break the logjam, and they can decide, based on what they see and what they know, what are the standards, or what are the minima, and who are who's sincere and who's not sincere. Certainly, it'll make things a lot more efficient, and there's no commandment to once you accept a person for conversion and you've decided that they're sincere, to make their lives to make their lives a long drawn out process.
Right.
aside from learning the basics of what you're supposed to do when you're a Jew. This was actually this model was also endorsed by one of the leading Halakhic lights, Jewish legal lights of the state of Israel, whose name was Rabbi Nachum Eliezer Rabinovich, Zichron Livracha, who was he was on the one hand a yeshiva head, which would have made him more of a theoretician, but he had come to Israel in the 80s after after 20 years as a the head of in the field in Texas and in Carolina, and he was the assistant head of the court in Toronto, which was a major Jewish community. And he also came out very strongly in favor of this model of returning things to the city heads, and that is exactly the pointed bar in this legislation, which sounds like it's a no-brainer. But at that point, given the structure of things today, it's not a no-brainer, because there is a general rule in government that if authority has been, or power is given to an authority, they'll fight like hell to have it not to have it taken away. Number one. Number two, the culture or the atmosphere of concern or fear of malfeasance or being too easy or too whatever has led senior members of the established rabbinate to actually besmirch local rabbis who were appointed by them in cities in the state of Israel, that they're gonna God, I don't know what they're gonna do. That's the consideration number two. Number three is, and I don't want to get into the deeper politics here, but a lot of people who are very, very sharp opponents of the present Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, their attitude basically is anything he does is bad. So therefore, it must be that whatever Matan Kahana, the Minister of Religion, is trying to do must be bad. Well, the truth of the matter is that, in my personal opinion, I think what Matan Kahana is doing is absolutely right on, and that I have a lot of reason to think so. But it's developed into a lot of heat, made into a lot of and engendered a lot of hysteria and a lot of actually fake news, because it's become a political football when we're talking about an existential issue, which is deeply regrettable.
And just because I don't mind jumping into it, there are certain people who are going to vote. Religious Minister Matan Kahana, who himself is not a rabbi, and he took this job to move forward certain reforms in Israel. The conversion is one of them. The kashrut, changing how kosher stamps of approval are given in businesses, that's already on its way. And it's caused a lot of issues. It's already in place. It already started. We'll see what happens. But one of the things that, I mentioned to you before we were speaking before the webinar, I was reading in Makor Rishon on Shabbat. It's one of the major Hebrew papers here, at least one of the major Hebrew papers that I can stomach reading. And there was an article about how he actually sat and made up this legislation. He's not a rabbi, and he knows he's not a rabbi, with Rav Druckman, who is one of the most esteemed rabbis, definitely in the national religious, if you will, modern Orthodox circles here in Israel, not the Haredi camp. But when it came, there are rabbis from the ultra-Orthodox community who signed a letter against this legislation, and he actually signed that letter.
So let me comment. Let me speak to
Please
that.
comment, because from what I was reading, this was a big blow to Matan Kahana. As you said, there's certain rabbis who are coming against rabbis that they actually appointed, and here this was a big step backwards for here. So maybe illuminate that.
There's a few issues that come up here. Number one, the legislation. The legislation isn't written yet. They're in the middle of formulating it. So there's a lot of leaks in the press about, they're going to do this and they're going to do that, but it hasn't been written yet. So I don't know where they get the information. Matan Kahana, one of the great things about Matan Kahana is, and I have a lot of admiration. I know him slightly, and I've discussed this issue with him. Is he knows he's not a rabbi, which is actually a very good thing. Having been a congregational rabbi myself, I know how many times really well-meaning lay people would come up to me and say, my rabbi when I was a kid did this, and they know better. So, yeah, well, he tried to be nice, but so Matan Kahana knows he's not a rabbi and doesn't pretend. The legislation which is being formulated as we speak is purely administrative. It takes no stand, and should properly so, takes no stand on any qualitative Jewish, religious, or legal issue. What are the criteria? What kind of study? What kind of declaration? What kind of follow-up? All of that stuff. None of that. It's all about returning the authority to convene courts for conversion to city rabbis who have to pass tests. I get news for you. Who have to pass tests and also tests of character that would daunt any American Orthodox rabbi at all. Okay, so that's number one. That's the whole business, and that's in fact what he settled with Rabbi Druckman. Now, Rabbi Chaim Druckman, who and I'm proud to say an old friend of the family, Rabbi Chaim Druckman is the senior, both senior in terms of quality and also in terms of he's quite elderly. Rabbi Chaim Druckman is really the senior religious Zionist rabbi. He's head of a yeshiva in Merkaz Shapiro. At past, he was a former member of Knesset, and really the senior figure on the scene. He himself was in charge of the conversion authority. I don't remember how many years, but certainly for a good number of years. And he oversaw the conversion or the regularization on standardization of the status of many Ethiopian Jews who made Aliyah, of whom there was some question of whether they were born Jewish or not. And he himself suffered from a vicious, virulent attack by an ultra-Orthodox member of the Supreme Rabbinic Court, which led to an outcry, from all over the country. And in the end, he was vindicated. So he knows what this is like. So it's not a surprise at all that he would have helped Minister Kahana in formulating the legislation. On the other hand, and this is where the other piece comes in, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So a word about this, about the chief rabbinate. There was always in Israel, at least under the Ottomans, what was called a Chacham Bashi, a chief rabbi, who was known. The one in Israel was known as the Rishon LeZion, the first, the primus, the first one person,
chief rabbi.
People in Zion, not Zionists, but in Zion.
Right.
The British, with the support of broad sectors of the non-Orthodox, but certainly the Orthodox community as well, except for those who were sort of anti-rejectionists, brought in a unique individual, Rabbi Abraham Isaac HaKohen Kook, to be the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi, who would serve next to the side of this Sephardic person, Rabbi Yaakov Meir at the time, whose position had been in there since since forever. Now, Rav Kook is revered isn't even the word. It was the founding formative figure of what's today the dominant school of religious Zionism. Everything he said, everything his writings, he was a person of incredible intellect and vision and spiritual breadth and legal. He was one of these. He was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And his persona, it just is everywhere in terms of the religious Zionist community, to the extent that in Israel, if you say Harav, the rabbi, without mentioning anybody else, the reference is always to Rav Kook, as if he were still here. I find it a little bit not disconcerting, but it's always confusing, because I had the privilege of being a disciple of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and we called Rabbi Soloveitchik the Rav. So So when now at least we've made it, we've made enough impact. So when I say the Rav, I say which Rav. So okay, that's gotten someplace. In any event, Rav Kook had a very exalted and electrifying vision of what of the religious and mystical, or the religious, the transcendent religious significance of the state of Israel. He envisioned the state of Israel as part of of an unimpeded and irreversible process of redemption, which will bring us into the Messianic age. And a significant part of that vision is the chief rabbinate, which will spread Torah and Judaism and spirituality, which will infuse the state of Israel with all that is good and everything that is divine. To the extent that if I don't remember the exact phrase, but he said something like it's the seat, or it's a landing pad for God's holy presence in the world. That vision of the chief rabbinate and of its vitality and of its centrality is still very much part of the religious Zionist world, especially the more conservative part of the religious Zionist world. And I mentioned before that there was never any modern Orthodoxy that developed in Israel. That's true. But over the past, say, 20, 30 years, there has been more of a sort of cleavage within the religious Zionist world between those who are fundamentally ultra-Orthodox but Zionist and those who are much more open to the outside world. Each group has its own problematics, but the most virulent and the most vocal opposition to Minister Kahana's opposition here comes from that segment, not just because of the Jewish legal concerns, but because it will, by definition, dilute the authority of the chief rabbinate, and therefore will perhaps impede the redemption. I mean, those of us who are in favor, I see the chief rabbinate as an important tool, but I don't.
Means to an end. It's not
the only institution that I know that has inherent sanctity is the temple and hasn't been built yet.
Right.
And so, that's a big part of the opposition.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a strong ideological opposition here, and unfortunately, it's being played out on the backs of people who might want to convert. And I shall have to admit that because a lot of the former Jews from the former Soviet Union came here, and a lot of them, according to a lot of reports, were willing to go through conversion 30 years ago, but they discovered they could come here and live here and go to the army and become Israelis like everybody else. And so they didn't feel that they need. We might have missed the boat, but at least we can try to mend as much of the problem as or the challenge, I should say, as.
So I think we'd be remiss in not mentioning that at the same time that this is going on, there are other movements to pass, if I'm not mistaken, different kinds of conversion laws by people who are not as, how shall I say, halachically inclined as Matan Kahana, who, while he's not a rabbi, definitely considers himself, an Orthodox devout Jew.
Okay, so
and you have that with Rabbi Kariv, who's a Reform rabbi, now a member of Knesset as well, and Avigdor Lieberman, who is very much part of that Russian aliyah and staunchly, I wouldn't even say secular, but I would even go as far as to say anti-religious in many ways.
Despite the fact that his wife and all of his children are Sabbath observers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But anyhow, so it's not like if this falls from Matan Kahana, so we just go back to the way that it was. I mean, there's other things that are being pushed through that for some people, I think myself included, and I don't know, maybe you, it's like, this might not be ideal, but the alternative is much worse.
Right. So I personally, conservative and reform conversion have been recognized in Israel, whether it's done outside of Israel or inside of Israel, by the Supreme Court for purposes of aliyah, of the law of return. Whereas I do not believe in religious coercion, I oppose that move as well, just as I oppose the batting down the hatches among in certain sectors of the rabbinic world, for the exact same reason I said before, that the only, let me put it this way, and I'm not going to even appeal to a rabbi here. One of the greatest Jewish historians of the previous generation, I guess I'm his spiritual grandson because my teacher was his student. His name was Professor Yaakov Katz, rector of the Hebrew University, really by all accounts considered to be the really great leading Jewish historian of a generation and a half ago. Has written and has said on more than one occasion, well, he passed away, but on more than one occasion, that that the Jewish people does not undergo schism, fatal schism, because of disagreements about ritual observance. Jews don't split over what you can eat, or whether there should be Shabbat, or whether you can eat, whether you eat matzah on Pesach. None of that. There is only one thing that will split the Jewish people in half irreparably, and that is the question of who is a Jew. In other words, are you recognized by the Jewish polity as Jewish or not? And that has happened over and over and over again in Jewish history. Large sectors of the Jewish people end up breaking off and disappearing based on this. Now, it might not happen overnight. It might take 100 years. It may take 200 years, but they're gone. One classic example is the Karaites. In the 8th century, there was a huge fight that broke out throughout the Jewish world over whether Judaism should be determined, or Jewish practice should be determined by a close reading of the Bible only, or whether the oral tradition, which dates back whenever in the Talmud, is the criterion. There was at one time a fully 40, perhaps even 50% of the Jews in the world were Karaites. They ended up, today there are maybe a few thousand in the world. They are not,
among other places.
It's a very small number.
Yes.
Most of them are no longer Jews, and they're no longer Jews for one reason. They're no longer Jews for one reason because they did not follow the matrilineal principle of a Jewish mother, and obviously their conversion was not acceptable because they didn't recognize the oral law. Those Karaites that say Karaites, all right, so they're Karaites. Everybody else got lost. Similarly, at the time of the destruction of the temple, there were many historians, based on actually a Greek historian, a Christian historian writing in Greek, claim that there were 8 million, that 10% of the free people in the Roman Empire were Jewish, meaning about 8 million people. If you add the Jews of Babylonia, maybe you get to 9 or 10. Fully 7/8 of them disappeared. Why? For the same reason. Because they didn't. Because they decided that they didn't keep to these lines of identity. They continue. It's my friend Simcha Golden was a professor at Tel Aviv University. In his first book, the subtitle was the Enigma of Jewish Survival. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Because we've gone up and down and up and down and up and down in terms of numbers. But this is the one thing which causes irreparable schism, because once a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman and has a non-Jewish child, he'll love the child, and whatever that child is not Jewish. And you can't, and so yes, other movements will say, no, we recognize the child as Jewish. That may be, but we don't know what the long-term implications of that are, and based on the Pew studies, it's not happy. Number two, the overwhelming, from a purely democratic point of view, the overwhelming majority of the Jews of the land of Israel, the state of Israel, whether they are personally observant or not, want these basic issues to be determined according to traditional Jewish law. If you put together what are called the traditional Jews with those who are actually Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, you get close to 80% of the population, if not more. So that's a democratic issue. And that's been our determination. And yeah, the truth of the matter is that whereas I certainly have no objection, why would I have objection? You want to have other kinds of synagogues and pray however you want. I go back to a wonderful book that was written by a colleague of mine, whose name was Professor Lauren Schiffman at NYU, New York University. And Larry has a book was called Who? Oh boy, I know I got confused. It was called Who Was a Jew? There was a professor at Ben Gurion, also a tremendous scholar, Jerry Blitzstein, may rest in peace, who wrote an article called Who Was Not a Jew. No, but this book is called Who Was a Jew? Who Was a Jew? And he noted something really striking. He proved, to my satisfaction anyways, that we all know that the time of Jesus and the time of Second Temple, the Jewish community was divided into four major, very militant groups. There were the Pharisees, there were the Sadducees, there were the Essenes, and then there was everybody else. We don't talk about the everybody else, but the everybody else was also
and everybody else, right?
And you know what? And they fought about everything under the sun, but we have no record or hint of a record that they ever fought over the question of who's a Jew. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very profound. I think that was a very profound insight when it comes to how the people met, how they express themselves Jewishly. I would say there wasn't a lot of inclusiveness, but you would argue and fight, whatever. But nobody denied the other one was Jewish. Right. I think that's a model that I could certainly live with. Certainly, when I see that as I said, the existential question of Jewish self-definition is I think is far more important.
But if this other legislation happens, if Matan Kahana's legislation doesn't go through, and we don't have the rabbis in the towns being able to convert, according, as you said so really eloquently, because they know the people and they understand the stories and they see what's going on, and not to mention the technical logjam that will be broken. The alternative here is that within a few years, and it's already happening now. Look, I just finished my degree at Bar Ilan University, where you teach. And one really nice guy in one of my classes, we studied together. And I'd mentioned that my husband and I had gone to Cyprus, and he said, I got married in Cyprus because he's from a Russian family. He's technically not Jewish. He married an Israeli girl. They had to get married in Cyprus because, as you said before, and I don't know if you want to take a minute to expand on it, there's no civil marriage in Israel. Do you think that would be a solution here, to not have every marriage go through the rabbin, or that just makes the situation worse?
You know what? The rabbis have an expression that prophecy, once the last prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, died, prophecy was
died with them.
Among most people, and went over to crazy people. So I hope I'm not a crazy person. I don't know what's going to be. You could, if you are, I tend to be somewhat less of an optimist. I can see a situation in which the fissure within the body politic of the Jewish people could get to such a degree that it could actually hurt our ability to be able to withstand pressures from the outside.
Existential pressure.
Exactly right. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, and by the way, what would come with that is something which I really would not want to see happen, but it may. Even people who are more moderate are going to have to start keeping records of who's really Jewish and who's not, which is not something which I think anybody really wants. Mm-hmm.
Well, your kid comes home, you have to start doing a background check on their family.
Exactly. So when people come on Aliyah and they have to prove that they're Jewish also, but it's not the same kind of. It's not the same kind of. On the other hand, if I want to be optimistic, I could say, well, there'll always be a certain amount of intermarriage, and there'll be always a certain amount of people like this. But given the fact that the country is becoming increasingly Jewish, then converting might become more and more bonton. There might be an ever greater demand for it. And as a result, it might very well be that further down the line, perhaps we'll be in a situation where such an initiative could go through. I don't know. People in this country have a tendency to dig in, sort of like dig themselves into their positions and not move. So I really don't know I really don't know what to say. But I'm concerned. It's one of the reasons why I chose to take the step and finally put my money where my mouth was, and to serve on. They're recognized but unofficial Jewish conversion courts for an organization called Halakhic. I am perfectly satisfied with the integrity of every single person or couple that comes through has come before us. It's not we're not talking about any kind of, this is not any kind of, what's the word, assembly line of just plow through people through. It's very, people they study, and for whatever reasons they don't go to the Rabbanut. I see the standards are certainly perfectly acceptable. The standards in some cases are better than standards elsewhere in the Jewish world.
And yours is accepted? I mean, by the way you're doing?
We are accepted for purposes of Aliyah, not recognized by not for purposes of the Rabbanut. By the way, a lot of this is anti-establishmentism in the sense that there are even two born Jews. Many of them will not go to marry it's against the law, but will not marry in the in the Rabbanut, but will insist on having an Orthodox rabbi and two witnesses and a marriage canopy and everything else. They just don't want to be part of this apparatus.
Right. That's what people say, that institutionalized Judaism is turning people off to the beauty of what Judaism really is, because it just becomes a set of rules and no, you can't. And people who are interested in Judaism and the incredible way of life that we know that it offers, who might have run to some ashram in India and someone said to them, it might be right under your feet.
That's the whole point, that people are returning. The thing is that, but you don't want to have total anarchy either.
Right.
One of the things that, for example, divorce is also involved in the rabbinate, and there are cases, all kind. I'm not going to let's not get into women that can't have trouble getting
and mom's Beirut, and there's all kinds of issues that come.
So a lot of this wildcat rabbinical courts is also
dangerous.
So the idea, the truth of the matter is, a friend of mine has offered, and I think it's not a bad idea, that the Rabbanut should be transformed in something of a regulatory agency. Let's take the example of kashrut, for example. Rather than having the Rabbinate be in charge of all kashrut, bring in competition, but
that's what they're starting to do now.
The basic standards be set, and then you decide, and let the competition go. So everybody, when they say, "Oh, it'll be like in America," it's one of the great things about kashrut in America is that there are a lot of competing kosher supervisions, and they end up making them better. Competition actually is a plus here, because you got to fight for your customers, and you don't necessarily lower standards for doing that.
So if you already mentioned the United States, we have a question here from Stephen Gilbert. What about the intrusion of American Jewish sentiments into the Israeli dialogue? How material is this source of divisiveness? I assume he's speaking about the reform and the conservative and a lot of the different movements. I mean, I don't want to get into it because it's a whole other webinar, the Women of the Wall and Robinson's Arch and the prayers and a lot of that. It's
deeper than that. It's deeper than that. This is something I'm also very much involved in, not in any official capacity, but in the cultural wars. The waves of the cultural wars in America are beating at the shores of Israel, and they pop up in Tel Aviv and at the universities, and things come up on TV and radio. The idea, there is a very profound disconnect between the way the average Israeli views himself as a Jew and the way the average American might view himself as a Jew. In America, especially because of the way that the conservative reform movement have developed and beyond, and other things, as with all of identity politics, you are whatever you decide you declare to be, because the absolute autonomy of the individual is what is sacred. The idea of the collective, and that the people have a right to impose their view or their idea on somebody else, is an anathema. Here we are still and maybe more so, We are still very tribal. We are still very much a collective. We sacrifice for the greater good. It might not be as much as it was 30, 40 years ago, but it's still a very, very big deal. Everybody, unfortunately, it usually comes out only when there's a war, but or there's bad things happening. But the kind of togetherness is just, it's awesome. And therefore the idea is I can declare that I'm Jewish and that's it. Or that everything goes is not an option in the Israeli vocabulary, generally speaking. I'm not talking about, again, there are exceptions, and certainly in the among the literati in Tel Aviv and elsewhere, you'll find people like that. So yeah, it's beginning to make, that kind of thing is beginning to make inroads. The other movements, look, I understand the problem of the other movements. They want to be involved and they want to be represented here. But on this question, I'm talking about this question. I don't think they have a right to. I don't think it's proper to score ideological points on my back or the back of my children. Okay. I'm going to be very clear about that.
Another question from Juliet. Oh, hi, Juliet. Shavei Yisrael offers conversion classes in English for Jews from lost cultures. I assume she's talking about like the Bnei Menashe from Yampur, to some degree, maybe also the Ethiopian Jews. Do you think that's appropriate? I mean, assuming that they're Shavei Yisrael offers conversion classes in English for Jews from lost cultures. Is this appropriate? Okay. Oh, that wouldn't be. I don't know how English would fit into there because that's not their native language. I'm not really sure.
Look, I know my wife works in Kiryat Arba, and a lot of the Bnei Menashe from India are there. These are very religious people. I mean, they convert. They do all the. I mean, there's no, the ones I know at least are not. There's no issue. I see though that my friend Rachel Silvetsky was.
Yes, I was just going to say,
and I'm a little bit too one-sided. Look at.
Okay, so I want to explain Rachel Silvetsky. I hope you're doing well, Rachel. I haven't seen you in a long time. I found it very disappointing that you had one side without a rabbi who was against Kahana's conversion plan, as I am. Totally legitimate comment. This was not going to be a debate between rabbis, though. It was never intended to be.
No, but it's fair to. It's very
fair. It's very fair. I'm happy to do another webinar with the rabbi who's against it.
Okay. I mean, but I'm willing to say that the concern is that once you let the control out of the hands of the chief rabbinate, it'll become total anarchy. And there are people who say that what'll happen is there'll be wildcat batei din that are set up to convert illegal immigrants in southern Tel Aviv, and that
people will be paid. I mean, bribed in order to.
No, and that's a concern. And I know for a fact that this. I know that's why this rule. That's why the law has no halachic content. It's all administrative, because the only people who would be allowed to appoint batei din, and they would be directly responsible for them, are city rabbis. No, I mean, for example, so Giurka Halacha, which I'm part of, would go out of business. The way I understand it, anyways. The only courts would be, and of the few city rabbis who, to the best of my knowledge, would be involved, these are people of absolutely unquestionable integrity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but it was a good comment, and this is definitely not something that everybody agrees on, not at all. And we don't even know if it's going to end up passing. But the purpose of tonight's webinar was, and I said it at the very beginning, was not even necessarily to give answers, was to present the issue, which has been in the headlines a lot. And I know that a lot of people are just confused about what's happening here, and to try and just minimize a little bit of that confusion. And I hope that we were able to do that. And I know that, I mean, I couldn't say any better, as I said, than Rabbi Wolf, to be able to really lay out some of the history and some of the differences with the other religions and what the issue is here. But we really don't know what's going to be. But that it's a problem of major concern, that I think everybody can agree on, and that some solution needs to be found.
By the way, I should add
our hope.
That one of the things about being in the middle is you do the one thing that that they teach you in the army you're never supposed to do. And that is, you never fight a two-front war. Because if you fight a two-front war, you're going to lose, because the enemy's going to wear you down. So I like to balance what I said before by saying that on the other side of the discussion is a very, very loud and very, very powerful lobby in the concerned Jewish elite of the state of Israel, who absolutely want to create conversion for purposes of marriage, which has no religious element to it at all.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So in other words, so at the same time,
kids are Jewish, but it's
at
not.
The same time as I'm trying to make sure that Shulchan Aruch is absolutely, it's not, and is not weakened down, but just simply more people, you sort of break the law, the bureaucratic logjam. Yeah, fighting on the other side to say no, under no circumstances can be any kind of Judaism. As I said, this combination of what Rav Saadia Gaon said in the 10th century, that our nation is a nation by virtue of the Torah. And that cuts both ways. It means that the Torah is primary, and it also means that we have a national identity. And both of them are, we are a nation, and we are, and that nation is determined by the covenant with God writ large. Everybody's yelling. So on this side, what are we emphasizing more? Are we emphasizing more the way the conversion is done should be 120%, because I'm not talking about anything less than 100%. On the other hand, I got the guy saying no, 50% is fine. Right. And you're talking about people who are on, I'll say the left just for convenience. People on the left who are, they're wonderful people, they're learned people. Generally, they're very prominent academics and cultural people. There are some of these. There were individuals that are involved. I can't mention names because this one group that I've been arguing with hasn't gone public yet. But so it's like I sometimes when one of these meetings, I come home. I leave this room and I walk 2 feet to go to my to the other living room. The way I've lived my life, right? I was in Rome 2 days ago, right? From sitting here. Right. And my wife said, I'm exhausted. And my wife said, what do you need this for? I said, because because the Rabbi Soloveitchik used to say, and I'm not saying Khalila that he would have endorsed Matan Kahana.
No way of knowing. Yeah,
we no way of knowing, and Khalila. But he once, when he used to say that when you study Talmud, and there were three approaches to a given issue, and there were two extreme approaches, and there's one which seems to be somewhere in the middle. He said it's always easier to understand and to interpret the extreme positions, but it's the middle position which is the one that's usually the one most reasonable and the one that we should decide by.
Well, I want to thank you for your involvement. I know that it hasn't added years to your life, for sure. But your commitment to Judaism and to the Torah way of life and to the Jewish people, I think, was clear for all of us to see. And whether one agrees with you or not, I think we can all appreciate the tremendous effort that you're putting in, really, and with everything you do, in order to try and square this circle. Maybe there's no other way of putting it, and and seeing a bigger picture, that this isn't just an issue of who is a Jew. This possibly really has existential ramifications.
There are other religious issues that have to be faced head on, and here I'm very. I mentioned it in passing, and for me, this is a critical issue, but the whole threat to the dissolution of the family and the destruction and genderlessness and all this other stuff, which it cannot be squared with Judaism, and which I think ultimately is corrosive. That has to be fought also, and on those, as ironically as it might be, on those issues, I'm foursquare with the same people that are criticizing me over the question of conversion.
Well, I think that just makes you like an interesting person. You don't have to fit into one little box. There was actually an article by Rav Chaim Navon, also in Makor Rishon the Shabbat, that there's certain rabbis like, Rav Shlomo Eliyahu of Tzfat, who's come out very, very strongly on the abuse, the sexual abuse. He was one of the Dayanim on this court last week. That's a whole other issue. But on other things, he has come out in ways, you know, against homosexuality and things that upset people who might have thought that he was just kind of going to be that all goes together. And what the bottom line of his article was, if you accept a rabbi for his honesty, you have to accept him. You're going to agree with some things, but not with others. And that's perfectly
true. And similar, but I would also add that, look at I have one epistemology, and the epistemology is, as in my own, limited way, I judge it whether it's good for the Torah or it's bad for the Torah. If it's good for the Torah, it's good for the Jewish people as well. And that means that you're often not going to, you're going to take every single issue on a issue by issue basis and not try to impose an ideological line on sort of like in terms of how you react to challenges. I try to be guided by Thoreau, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. You have to take every single issue per se, judge it, and you point it against your axiological, epistemological framework, and decide, is good for the Torah.
Perhaps that's what's been lost, is that connection to the little people and understanding the nuances of every case. And ligufo shel inyan, as they say, that each thing has to be judged on the particular merits or what's happening in that particular sphere, and not just one idea for everybody. And that what pulls me to Kahana's plan in that level of the rabbis who know the people that they're converting. Because that's something that I think very often is missing, is that personal knowledge. But anyway, okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Wow, so many people stayed on for the whole time. Rabbi Wolf, you were really fascinating. Can I put your contact information out
Absolutely.
there? Okay, so thank you. I appreciate that. So if anybody has further questions for the rabbi, then he's made himself available, and I think he knows what he's getting himself into. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Really, thank you so much. I know for some of you, you were squirming in your chairs. I was too at some point, but that's okay. We need to be able to come out of our comfort zones. That's a thing with me, and see different sides of things, even if at the end we don't agree. And that's super important. And we will continue doing that on these webinars. I certainly hope so, bringing interesting individuals who add to our knowledge and just make us think more about what's happening. And not be distracted by all the other noise that's out there. These things are too important. These things having to do with Israel and Judaism are just too important to be distracted from. So Eve Harrow, Director of Tourism, one day, again, Tourism and Community Development for One Israel Fund, really, and with thanks to Shauna for behind the scenes, and to One Israel Fund for sponsoring these webinars. Thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you back in just a few weeks. And wherever you are, just stay away from viral bearing people, and if you're sick, get well soon, and the world should go back to whatever, I don't even remember what normal is anymore. Okay, take care, everybody, and goodbye for now.
Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Gimpel. Have you heard about the Land of Israel Fellowship? People from all over the world, 24 countries, have joined. We meet live every Sunday, and the video session is recorded and then broadcast to all the members. And it's an exclusive group. It's a group that's focused on learning. We're focused on praying together. We're focused on growing together. And it has been one of the biggest blessings in my life. And we have people from New Zealand to Australia, Alaska, Hawaii, Hong Kong, Jews, Christians, we have a Buddhist, we have one Muslim that's joined. We have people from so many different backgrounds, languages, and cultures, and we are literally creating a virtual house of prayer for all nations. And it is truly marvelous. And so if you want more information about that, please visit www